Put it on your stuff. All right. Hello, we're reading The Hobbit today. Just getting everything set up. Hello, how are you? We're just sharing out the live right now. And we'll get rolling with The Hobbit. Anybody else read The Hobbit? You know, this is one of those classical fantasy novels of a journey, an unexpected hero. Someone even small can change the world. Unexpected. Hello, Kara. We're going to be reading The Hobbit today. And yes, The Hobbit by J.J.R. Tolkien. 1937. 1937 this book came out. It's a book about unexpected heroes and fantasy. We're going to have the whole dwarves that show up. It's going to be an exciting journey for us. There's music. There's a lot of neat things going on in The Hobbit. So glad that you could join us for The Hobbit. Another book, same time period, one of the predecessors. Should also check out C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Has the themes of high fantasy. You have a witch, good versus evil, people turning into stone. A very nice book. And yeah, you should buy The Hobbit if you're interested in The Hobbit, but we're going to be reading from The Hobbit or There and Back Again. Yeah! Well, Fernando, if, that's how you have it, that's fine. We're reading The Hobbit today. 1937 this came out. To the beginning of the Lord of the Rings series. Here we go. Here comes this famous line. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and oozy smells, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it set down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole. And that means comfort. It had a perfect round door like a porthole, painted green with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened on a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with parallel walls and a floor. Opened on a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with parallel walls and a floor. The hill, as all the people for many miles around called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No, going upstairs for the Hobbit bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these, wardrobes. He had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Looking over his gardening and meadow beyond, sloping down to the river, this Hobbit was a very well-to-do Hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered him very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures, or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. Hello, Alexander, how are you? This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost that neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular Hobbit was, what is a Hobbit? I suppose Hobbits need some description nowadays since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half or 8 our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. This is a little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright clothes, chiefly green and yellow. Wear no shoes, because their feet, thank you for that, my friend, grow naturally leathery soles, and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. Have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, furry laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this Hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely Hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go out and have an adventure. They discreetly disappeared, and their family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventure after she became Miss Mungo Baggins. Mungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her. Oh, nice. I got some milk tea that showed up. That's great. Partly for her money, that was to be found neither under the hill or over the hill or across the water. And there they remained to the end of their days, still in its portable that Bilbo, her only son, although he hooked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit odd in his making from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful Hobbit hole, built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down, immovable, but most curious chance one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, enjoying an enormous long wooden pipe and reaching nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you have heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard a very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouting up all over the place where he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took was unalived. In fact, the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the waters on business of his own, since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. And all that unexpected Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointy blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over which he had long white beard, hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he met it. That sun was shining, and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from long, bushy eyebrows and struck out further with the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Oh, that is good morning where I want it. Or not. Or that you feel good this morning, or that it's morning to be good." "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco outdoors into a bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said the Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." Unfortunately, I don't come with it if you buy it. But you know, when you read it, you can think of this moment in time. I should think so in these parrots. We are playing Quite Folk. Thank you for that. And have no use for adventures. Nasty sort of uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said our Mr. Baggins, and struck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite as short, and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the hobbit, without saying anything, till Bilbo, quite uncomfortably and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant what the conversation was at an end. "What? A lot of things you do that use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me? And that I won't be good till I'm off?" Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir. And I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door. Gandalf, good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magical diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of the princess and the unexpected luck of windows. Not the man that used to make such particular excellent fireworks. Yes, those fireworks is what we saw in the Lord of the Rings movie. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on summer's eve. Splendid. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You'll notice already that Miss Baggins was not quite so prowsy as we like to believe. Also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not that Gandalf was responsible for so many great lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures, anything more climbing trees than visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing into other shores. Bless my life, used to be quite inner. I mean, you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. Where else should I be? Said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for you old grandfather's Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have. Twice now, my pardon. I'll give it to you, and in fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable, too. Very likely if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today, good morning. But please, come tea. Any time you like. Why not tomorrow come tea? Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside the round green door and shut it as quickly as he darted. Not to seem rude, wizards, after all, are wizards. Yes, yes, yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I like the whole description of the Hobbit home. I would like to have a home like that. It's very nice. Very comforting. That's good. Alright, we'll continue. But yeah, I like how he describes the Hobbit's home. Very descriptive in this book. Very nice. The next day, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf and did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this, Gandalf tea Wednesday. Yesterday had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came tremendous ring on the front door, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put out another cup and saucer, and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say when he saw that it was not a Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was open, he pushed inside just as if he had been expected. He hung his hood cloak on the nearest peg, and "Dalwyn, at your service," he said with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins, at yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for a moment. And when the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, "I am just about to take tea party. Pray come and have some with me. A little stiff perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation?" They had not been at table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. "So you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was opened, just as if he had been invited. "I see they have begun to arrive already," he said when he caught sight of Dolwyn. Green hooded hanging up, he hung his hand out next and said, "Balin, at your service," he said, with his hand on his breast. "Thank you," said Bilbo with a grasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they have begun to arrive, and that had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run out short. And then he, as a host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painfully he might have to go without. "Come along and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better if I had the same to you, my good sir," and said Balin with a white beard, "but don't mind some cakes. Seed cakes, if you have any." "Lots," Bilbo found himself answering to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his happy supper morsel. So, seed cakes. I wonder what those are. I'm trying to think of what would be a seed cake. Sounds delicious. I'm more into like fruit cakes, or like a bun cake, but a seed cake. I don't know if I had that before. When he got back, Balin and Dolwyn were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring, the bell again, and then another ring. "Gandalf for certain this time," he thought as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods and silver belts and yellow beards. And each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade in their hope. As soon as the door began to open, Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "Keeley, at your service, and Finley," added the other, and they both swept off with blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners at the time. "Dolwyn and Balin are already, I see," said Keeley. "Let us join the frog." "Frog?" Thought Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink. He had only just had a sip in the corner while the four dwarfs sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and the desperates of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand, and he did not want to, for they sound much too of interest when ding-dong, ding-a-ding-dong, his bell rang again. As with some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the hand off. Someone at the door, he said brinkly. Some four, I should say, but some, said Finley. Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance. The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would have all safe for supper. Then the bell rang again louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all. It was 5. So we're up to... How many dwarfs are we up to? So we had... I think we were at 4 dwarves? We're at 4 dwarves, and now we just added another 4. Dory, Nori, Ori, Orn, and Golan were their names. And very Sue, 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, and a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the peg, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already had almost become a frog. Some called for ale, and some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so that the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth. The seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were settling on at a round of butter scones, when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage very angry and altogether bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more. So we're at 4 more. Do we have 12 dwarves? Is that where we're at? Is this 12 dwarves? He pulled open the door with a jerk, and all fell on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind them, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had quite a dent on the beautiful door, and he had also, by the way, knocked out the secret marker that had put there that morning before. Carefully, he said. It's not like Bilbo to keep friends waiting on a mat and then open a door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Borfur, Bromabur, and especially Foreign. At your service, said Bifur, Borfur, and Bromabur. If I'm messing up the dwarfs' names, I will do some research and find out how to pronounce them. But we're doing our best. But there's a lot of different dwarf names. Standing in row, then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one, with one long silver tassel. This last belonged to Foreign, an enormous, important dwarf, in fact, no other than the great Foreign Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat, with Bifur, Borfur, and Bombur on top of him. For one thing, Bombur was immensely fat and heavy. Foreign, indeed, was very hearty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times, that at least he grunted, "Pray, don't mention it, and stop frowning. Now, we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering, I hope. There isn't something left for the late-comers to eat and drink. What's that, tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Foreign. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Bifur. "And mince pies and cheese." Mince pies and cheese. That sounds good. "And pork pie and salad," said Bombur. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarves through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries, and just bringing on the cold chicken and pickles. "Seem to know as much about the inside of my ladders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively and was perplexed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched avenger had not come right into his house. By that time, he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays. He was getting very hot and red in face and annoyed. "Come-faced and bedboard these dwarves," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Yo, and behold, there stood Balin and Dolan at the door of the kitchen, and Feli and Keeley behind them. And before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat on the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on the stool at the fireside. So, a total of 13 dwarves. Again, with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, are we talking like, is this a reference to the 13 disciples? I don't know. Could be, could not be. But it is a gathering of people. Gandalf sat at the head of the table with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on the stool at the fireplace, stumbling at the biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look at this, there was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on, and at last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will all stay to supper?" he said in his politest, unpressed tones. "Of course," said Forin, "and after we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Forin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of things. Off they went. So, in this particular book, we have a picture of the Hobbit's area. A nice picture here. Very nice. It helps you imagine it. You know, I still have the movies to imagine what this looks like, these hills and stuff. New Zealand, but very nice. All right, take a little break here. I'll drink something, and then we're going to get to the songs of the book. Yeah, so 13 dwarfs show up at your doorstep unexpected. What would you do? Now, he's being a good guest, and he's serving them everything that they ask. Man, he has a lot of cakes and pies, like, at the ready. Like, I imagine Bilbo's house is having a room, a pantry of this pies and cakes just stacked to the ceiling in one of his rooms. It's like a pantry. One of the favorite things for a hobbit to do is eat. They like the third breakfasts. So yeah, ready to eat. All right, let's get moving. What do you think about all this food in this book? Does that get you hungry? It gets me hungry sometimes. All right. Let's get moving on this. Waiting for the trays. Waiting for the trays. Waiting for the trays, balanced columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top. With one hand, while the hobbits ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage," but the dwarves only started to sing. "Chip the glass and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggin hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on fat. Pour the milk on the panty floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a bowling bowl. Pound them up with a trembling pole. And then you finish it any or a hole. Send them down hole to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggin hates. So careful with the plates." Yes, they're singing that wonderful song. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was clean and put away safe as quickly as lightning, while the hobbit was turning around and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went. Up the chimney or behind the clock or the mantelpiece, or under the table or around and around the ceiling, but wherever it went, it was not quite enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! It sent a smaller smoke ring from a short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke rings would go green and come back to hover over the wizard head. He had a cloud of them about him, ready and in the dim light, and it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke ring he had sent up the wind over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Keely and Feely rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur pronounced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Balfur went out too, and came back with clarinets, and they had left among the walking sticks. Dolan and Balin said, excuse me, I left mine in the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. They came back with violos as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was beautiful golden harp. And then Thorin struck. The music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and it was swept away into dark lands, under strange moons far over. The water was very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened to the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadows of Gandalf's beard waggled against the wall. The dark filled all the rooms, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one, and then another, thank you for that, began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the doors and the deep places of their ancient homes. And this like a fragment of the song. It can be like their song without their music. Here we go. Going to do our best here. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away weary break a day to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarfs of Nor made mighty spells, with hammers feel like ringing bells, and places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elfish lord, there may a gleaming golden hoard. They shaped and wrought in light they caught, the hide and gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars and crowns they hung. The dragon fire at twisted wire, they messed the light of the moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ever break of day to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. There lay the long and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red and flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, the men looked up with faces pale. The dragons mere more fierce than fire laid low their towers and horses frail. The mountain smoked beneath the moon, the dwarves they heard the thump of the doom. They fled their hall, the unliving fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. For over the misty mountain grim, the dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away eerie break of day to win our harps and gold from him. All right, thank you for those gifts, my friends. Thank you, Stephen. Yes. We're reading The Hobbit. And that was their nice song about the misty mountains. As they sang, the hobbits fell to love of beautiful things, made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him. A fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water and flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of the plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill, kindling it all the flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins the Baggin Underhill again. Hello. He got up trembling. He had less than a half of a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar. He'd not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in dark. "Where are you going?" said Foreign, in a tune that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo. Apologetic. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in a fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush!" said Gandalf. "Let Foreign speak," and this how Foreign began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are here met together in a house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent odious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." And paused for breath and for a polite remark from a hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, for he was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out that was so perplexed. So Foreign went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, our means, our policy and device. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our objective is, I take it, well known to us all, to the ensemble, Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves. I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely, for instance. The exact situation of the moment may require a little brief explanation." This was Foreign's style. He was an important dwarf. He had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted by poor Bilbo, couldn't bear it any longer. "I may return," he began to fell, a shriek coming up inside, and very soon he burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light at the end of the magic staff, and in its fireworks glare, the poor little blue hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again, and then was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink on his elbow, and they went on back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf, as they sat down. "Again, gets funny, odd fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetically exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took, great-grand-uncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king, Golfrimbol's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in the way the battle was won, and the game of golf invented in the same moment." And the meaningful, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was arrived in the drawing room after a while, and a drink and a carp nervously at the door of the parlor. This is what we heard. Golan, speaking humph, or some sort of more like that. "Will he do you think? Is there very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon, all his relatives, and unalive all of us. I think it sounded more like a fright than excitement. In fact, if I had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on the little fellow, bobbing and puffing on the fat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar." Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast and to be fought fierce. As for the little fellow bobbing on the mat, he almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, the Bilbo's part regretted that he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you are a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in. Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you are talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing this is what we call being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of east and fight the wild wereworms of the last desert, I have a great uncle once ball rower took. And yes, but what was long ago, said Golan. I was talking about you, and I assure you there is marks on this door, the usual one in trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it is usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar, if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday, tea time. Of course this is the mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself for a very good reason. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to the digging coal. So, they needed 14 to stop the bad luck. And why is 13 a bad luck number? Think about that. Why is 13 a bad number? He scrolled so angrily at Golan that the dwarf huddled back his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and struck out his bushy eyebrow, till Bilbo shot his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more arguments. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar he is. Or he will be when time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little light on this. On a table in the light of the big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made byFor, your grandfather, Thorin. He said in answer to the dwarves' excited question, it is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough that the land's about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and the weathered heath, and where the great dragon breeds. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever were arrive. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is a secret entrance. You see the rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other ruins? That marks is a hidden passage in the lower hill. Look at the map in the chapter, and you will see there are runes in red. It may have been the secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it is a secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough how to find out anything there is about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because he is too small. 5 feet high and a door 3 may walk abreast, say the runes, but Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and the men of the dell. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and all the halls there hung a large one of the country round, with all the favorite walks marked in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from anybody outside apart from the dragon? He asked. It was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In a lot of ways, Miss Gandalf, but in this way, this one has been hidden. We don't know whether without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door, which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' methods. I think that is the right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map, I want a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, he said in his hand to Thorin, a key with a long barrel. Ancient wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and I fastened it upon his fine chin that hung around his neck and under his jacket. Now the things began to look more hopeful. There's news altered them much for the better. So far he had had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the long lake. After that the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. I go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. but we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out comes the dragon, too far often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands. And this neighborhood heroes are not scarce, and simply not to be found. Swords and their parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees and shields and cradles and dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on a burglar, especially when I remember that existence of a side door, and here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Vorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas and suggestions, he turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. Mock politeness to Bilbo. Yes, what is this burglar going to do? Alright. Let's continue. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it go up there, and who belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map, and didn't you hear our song, and haven't we begun talking about all this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he, obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risk, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, ramifications, and so forth, but which we met. What I am going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thorin's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Farin the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made hunger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and he treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dell there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as princes and pay us handsomely, especially in food and supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves, although those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the likes of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was the brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves, and dwarves wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which particularly for every use unless they are alive, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they are hardly known a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make them thing of themselves, not even men a little loose scale on their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce for there. With the dwarves flying south or getting unalive, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse, there was the most especially greedy, strong, wicked worm called Smog. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaked and cracked in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside. I was one, luckily, a fine adventure lad in those days, always wandering about, and I saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of fire. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in the fire. By the time all the bells were ringing in Dell and the warriors were alarmed, the dwarves rushed out for their great gate. But there was the dragon waiting for him. None escaped that way. The river rushed up the stream and fog fell on Dale. and in the fall the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usually unhappy story, it was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept through the fore gate and routed out the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys and cellars, mansions and passages. After that, there were no doors left alive inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it all up in a great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people unalive and gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were all well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smog. And there we unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with sign beards. They looked very grim, but they had said very little. When I asked how they had gotten away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in my proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we have had to earn our living as best as we could, up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining, but we have never forgotten our stolen treasure. And now, when I will allow we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off, here foreign stroked the gold chain around us, that we still mean to get back and to bring our curse home to Smog if we can. I have often wondered about my father and my grandfather's escape. I see how they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why he did not come down to the rightful heir. I did not get a hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather, Forer, was unalive, you remembered, in the mines of Moria by Osmog the Goblin. Curse his name, said yes, Foren. And Foren, your father, went away on 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday, and he was never been seen by since. True, true, said Foren. Well, your father gave me this to give to you. And if I have chosen my own time and way of handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he had never told me yours, so on the whole I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said the handing of the map to Foren. I don't understand, said Foren, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the lines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was unalive, and lots of adventures of almost unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. Now he got there, I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whether were you doing there? Asked Foren with a shudder, and all the dwarfs shivered. Never your mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save my father, but I was too late. He was witless and waging, and he had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Foren. We must have given a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the power of the dwarves, but together, if they could all be collected again for the four corners of the world, the one thing your father wished was for his son to read a map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I have to go out to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should not say that you ought to go east and have a look around. And after all, it's a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the side door long enough, I just say you will think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night. If you see what I mean, what about the bed and an early start and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Foren. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't setting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about the bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey, fried, not poached. And mind you don't break them. After all, the others had ordered their breakfast without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much. They all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for all of them and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed and went his own little bed. Very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tokenness was wearing off, and he was not quite so sure that he was going on this journey in the morning. As he lay in the bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself to the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away eerie break of day to find our long-forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and he gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long before the break of day which he woke up. All right. We finished the first chapter of The Hobbit. This is Professor Fox, and this is the Cozy Corner, where we read classic literature and talk about it. And you can join me next time for the continuation of The Hobbit, one of those unexpected journeys where someone so small can change the world. A reluctant hero. Very cool. Take care, everybody.